In 3 statements to his Truth Social platform, Trump pleaded ignorance about him. In one, he said, quote, Ye, formerly known as Kanye West, was asking me for advice concerning some of his difficulties, in particular having to do with this business. We also discussed, to a lesser extent, politics. I told him he should definitely not run for president. Any voters you may have should vote for Trump. Anyway, we got along great. He expressed no anti-Semitism, and I appreciated all the nice things he said about me on Tucker Carlson. Why wouldn't I agree to meet? Also, I didn't know Nick Fuentes. Now, of course, Donald Trump knows Nick Fuentes now and still hasn't condemned him. And that's led some to point out that Republicans are now coming out against Trump. But look at who the Republicans are. It's mostly Republicans who have criticized Trump in the past, like former Vice President Mike Pence, who told NewsNation's Leland Vittert earlier tonight that he thinks Trump should say something more to distance himself.
President Trump was wrong to give a white nationalist, an anti-Semite, and a Holocaust denier a seat at the table. And I think he should apologize for it, and he should denounce those individuals and their hateful rhetoric. I think the president demonstrated profoundly poor judgment in giving those individuals a seat at the table. And as I said, I think he should apologize for it. He should denounce them without qualification.
Republican governors Brian Kemp of Georgia and Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, as well as Republican Senators Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine, have also made similar comments. But none of those regular Trump critics are likely to change any minds. I think to most who support Donald Trump or are inclined to, having a dinner with Kanye West, who is an anti-Semite, who brought an even more virulent anti-Semite, isn't going to change anything politically. That's not to say that those who don't care about this are anti-Semites. I don't even think it makes Trump himself an anti-Semite. I just think this stuff is already baked into the Donald Trump political pie. He doesn't want to condemn Fuentes now for fear of seeming weak or wrong or potentially alienating the most radical part of his base, some of whom are racists and anti-Semites. But many others either just accept it because they think the other option politically is that much worse, or they care about other things more. So I'm just not sure how this changes anything. Joining us now is Noah Rothman, conservative commentator, associate editor of Commentary magazine. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it, Noah. All right, so do you think that this changes anything politically for Donald Trump?
Look, my predictions are as good as the paper they're written on, and I haven't written anything down, so I take it with a grain of salt. But the reaction that we saw after the election, where there was this burst of enthusiasm for something new, something had to give. This was a new moment, right? And yet we saw all the usual suspects who never had any use for the guy in the first place doing all the talking, everybody else on background, and a lot of silence from those who perceive themselves to be the beneficiaries of his movement without Trump. And if he can entropically disappear. I haven't seen anything different to change my mind until the last several hours. The most notable among them being Marco Rubio, who came out very forcefully about the bold, the profound, incandescent stupidity of this the former president's decision to sit down with these people, whoever let them in the door, and it was the president himself, most likely. That suggests an exasperation with the man and his profound lack of judgment that is now spilling out into the streets. And what everybody's wanted to avoid is an internecine conflict within the GOP. It may be unavoidable, and it may be upon us. It's too early to tell, but there are some unusual suspects joining the chorus of condemnations.
Well, talk to me about that. I mean, Rubio's an interesting one, right? As you say, in the last few hours. And I do agree with you that if others who are not typically critical of Trump come out and start criticizing Trump, that changes things. But you agree with me, do you not, that seeing the usual suspects, and I'm not mocking them or minimizing it in any way, I'm just talking about it politically, seeing the same Republicans who we have seen criticize Trump in the past, criticize Trump again, doesn't change anything. It requires Rubio and who else? You tell me some other folks you think might come forward.
That's a good question, and I I don't know if maybe a Ted Cruz, somebody who genuinely knows which way the wind is blowing and who behaves like a weather vane, tells you tells you what the mood of the party and whether they could capitalize on it. And Nikki Haley, for example, one of the things you said in that monologue, and there's nothing I disagree with you on the monologue, but one thing that I think you might have left out is the dynamic that prevails when the wrong people start criticizing Donald Trump.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.